Greetings and salutations and welcome to a video about audio. I have not done one of these in a long time. This time around we're going to be talking about my Stanton 500E Mark II. For those of you who have been following this channel for quite some time, you will know that from time to time I do videos about audio. And for those of you who have been following it for a very long time, you will know that I have very high praise for Stanton cartridges. What you might not know is that I consider this to be my white whale. This is the cartridge that I have wanted for years, and I do mean many years. For 10 years, off and on, I have been looking for one of these out in the wild, and something told me to go look on eBay last week, and one popped up, and I was able to get my hands on it. This particular specimen comes from, I think, the late 70s or very early 80s. The Stanton 500E cartridge was considered the broadcast standard for a long time for on-air playback in the days back when we used to play records on the radio. As a matter of fact, I have very fond memories of working one summer. It was an internship that I did in 1988 at a little radio station called WKXO in a tiny town called Berea, Kentucky, and the station was full of these. It had the Stanton 500Es. So I've always had very fond memories of them ever since then, and of course I worked with them in radio stations a lot. When I got back into records, it's been 10 years now, since 2009. The first cartridge that I had to play with was a Stanton L720, which was a P-mount version of the 500, and I enjoyed playing with that. And then I went off and got into other things. I've had a Stanton 681 since then, a couple of Pickering cartridges, but nothing lived up to the memory. I even had a Stanton 500 V3, which was the very much later models that were designed for DJs and whatnot. Didn't like that cart, didn't have very much finesse to it. The later models of the Stanton 500s, they came with pretty crappy styli. The styli tracked at like 3.5 grams. You had to track them very high to keep them from exhibiting sibilance and mistracking and stuff like that. This, on the other hand, comes with a tracking range between 1 and 2 grams. It has the D50E stylus on it. It's a 0.4 by 0.7 mil stylus, and I have it tracking at 1.75 grams, so 1 3/4 grams, and it's perfect. That's what I started out with when I put it on the turntable. So I have some other carts here to talk about. The one that I have most recently been using is an Ortophon 2M Blue, which is a $200 and something cartridge, and the replacement styli are anywhere from $160 US and higher. And so I didn't use this one very much, and I was never 100% in love with the sound, even though it is a relatively higher end cartridge. You've heard me talk a lot about the Audio-Technica. This is the AT95E. Now this is a budget cartridge, $40. But honestly, there's not that much difference between this one and this one. Yes, there is a difference, but you have to listen real hard and close. And then one that I wanted to mention here was the brand new AT-VM95E, which is supposed to be a replacement for this one. This is the conical version of that one right here. I ran that for a little while, but I didn't particularly like the way it sounded. All of those cartridges are good, and they're nice, but they all have their own personalities. And when you talk about broadcast cartridges, Stanton cartridges, one of the big things about them is that they have a very flat frequency response. They were designed that way. And any piece of audio gear, whether it be a cartridge or an amplifier or a set of speakers, if that has some sort of trait to it, like it has a lot of treble, let's say for instance like an Audio-Technica 440 MLA or MLB cartridge, those are noted for having a really crisp high end. The Ortophon 2M Blue here has a boomy bass, and it has a bit of a roll-off on the very high end. That combination can sound really good on a record that has like weak bass, but if you play a record that booms already and you do it with that cartridge, it can be a bit too much. Now, we're really nitpicking here, but it's absolutely true. That's true of any component. You might originally, when you first hear it, go, wow, that's pretty cool. I kind of like that extra bass, or I like that extra high end. But then after a while, it gets boring, and it kind of annoys you, because you're hearing that and you're not hearing the rest of the music. It's not coming through as a whole. And in those type situations, I always end up going for something else. So the Stantons, with their ruler flat frequency response, they were just the reference for the recording industry and the broadcast industry for many, many years. They made the 500, I think, for about 40 years. And of course, then they made the 680s too, and they made the 681s and stuff like that. But the 500, that was your workaday cart. That was the one that was on the turntables in the studio. You might have the 681s in the production room if you're going to make really high quality dubs to tape or something like that. So there were a lot of styli that were produced for this particular cart. And you have to make sure that if you're going to buy one of these from somewhere, that you find one that's really good. You want one that tracks at a decent tracking force, and we're talking below 3 grams. There were a ton of these that were made that tracked at, basically they gave you a range. They said it'll track anywhere between 2 and 5 grams. And when you see that, usually you're going to have to take it up between 3 and 4 grams to make it track without sibilance. There's nothing wrong with tracking a record at 4 grams. It's well within the specifications. It will not wear your records out as long as you keep the stylus replaced. But I kind of would rather not do that. I want an elliptical stylus that tracks much lower. So finding one these days, since these cartridges are no longer in production, a hi-fi stylus, it can be a bit difficult, but there are choices available. I looked, and you can get them from LP Gear. You can get it at turntableneedles.com. You can always find new old stock styli out there. This main one right here, this is the 0.4 by 0.7. This is the E, and on the side of it, it says E and MK2. And this is the Stanton D50E stylus. These are also interchangeable with the Pickering V15 cartridges. It's the same body. So you can use cartridges that worked with the Pickering V50 styli that worked with the Pickering. We're talking like the D5Es. Those are pretty good. And then you can use the later ones, which are the styli that were on the Pickering TLE P-mount cartridges. According to LP Gear and a couple of other places that I looked at, an upgrade for this is the Stanton D71 stylus, which was produced for a long time because they were on the L720s. Those were the P-mount cartridges that they produced. I had one of those early on. I've had a couple of those styli, and they don't do as well as the one that's on here. This is the original stylus. So at some point down the road, I may give those a try, but for right now, I have no intention whatsoever of doing anything to change how this works. I listened to it all day long. It showed up in the mail this morning. It took me about an hour to set it up. I wanted to make sure I had it dead on correct. I was afraid that it wouldn't track well. I thought maybe the rubber and the suspension might have dried up through the years. I don't seem to be having any issues with that. There is no sibilance. There is no distortion. It is very flat. It is very clean. It is exactly the way I remembered it being. It's very honest. It's wonderful for vocals, and it does a wonderful job of separating the frequencies. For instance, with this particular cartridge, you can hear the difference between a tambourine, a cymbal, and somebody saying the letter S. They all fall into their own little frequency range there, where with a lot of cartridges, even some pretty high-end cartridges, you notice that all turns into just a splatter, and you can't tell one from the other. And so there's a lot of detail that you get from the Stanton. And if you can find one, go for it. They are a little finicky. Make sure that you have them set up exactly right. And there are styli out there. Unfortunately, Stanton had a very unique way of mounting cartridges, where they have these little, I don't know if this is going to focus good enough to see, but if you look under there, you'll see there's these little wings that come off the top of the cart there. Well, they go into two little plastic pieces that slide in there, and then the screws bite into that. And if you buy one off the internet that does not come with that hardware, you can't mount it. So you need to be very careful about looking if you want to try one of these out. So this is my favorite cartridge of all time. And I have been very, very fond of the Audio-Technica, the AT95E. I've been using that for a while. Love the 2M Blue. The other ATs, the ones higher up, the 120E that I had before, and the later ones that I've heard in the 500 series from the VM 500 series, they have a very punched out high end and not a lot of bass. And that kind of gets on my nerves after a while. I've heard a lot of the Nagaoka or Nagalka cartridges. I'm not really sure what's the correct pronunciation of that, but whichever one, that's a Japanese company. And I like those. I have a friend of mine who has a bunch, and they sound good to me, but they don't have a lot of the high frequency extension that I'm looking for. I like to have a snap in the snare drum, and I like to hear a crack on the drums. And I've noticed that a lot of modern magnetic cartridges, the moving magnet cartridges below like $300, they tend to be bass heavy and they don't have a whole lot of high end, except for the Audio-Technicas. And in their case, it's too much. So this is the Goldilocks cart. This is the one that gets it just right. The Stanton 500E Mark II. I can't really end the video without playing you something, but I can't play you music because all of the music that I have on records is going to get a copyright hit if I put it on YouTube or Facebook. So what I have done is I have gotten a radio transcription disc. This is an ET, an electric transcription. That's an old word for a recording made off the air and put on a disc. That goes back to the 30s when you talk about that. This is WRVA Radio's 50th anniversary, and it is a record that I have heard of, finally got a copy of not too long ago. This was actually pressed and sold to the public for people in the Richmond, Virginia area who remember WRVA. And I think this came out, must have been the late 70s, I believe. Not really sure. You'd have to go look. You could go figure out when WRVA came on and do the math. But this is what I'm going to play, so you guys can get some idea of what this cartridge sounds like. And we're just going to play a few minutes of it to end the video.
For centuries, man has measured time in seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, and years. In the case of WRVA Radio, the clock started at 9 o'clock the evening of November 2nd, 1925. We have now reached a momentous anniversary. Incredible it is today to recall some of the dramatic events that helped shape the world in the last half-century.
This is Lowell Thomas in New York. He made it. Charles
It was a distinction, being the only nation in the history of the world that ever went to the poorhouse in an automobile.
But the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Without the help and support of the woman I love.
Oh, 400 or 500 feet into the sky, and it's a terrific crash, ladies and gentlemen. It's smoke and it's flames now, and the famous
Incredible it is that we should be digging trenches and trying on gas masks here.
Marschiert Deutschland und hinter uns kommt Deutschland!
The Battle of France is over. The Battle of Britain is about to begin.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air.
We will gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God.
Dwight D. Eisenhower.
People of Western Europe. A landing was made this morning on the coast of France by...
A press association has just announced that President Roosevelt is dead.
I now close my military career and just fade away.
The whole world is thankful that negotiations at Panmunjom have brought the fighting in Korea to an end.
All right, well, the Korean War is over, so I guess we'll stop there. But that's a time sweep. It goes on for quite some time. 1975 is the year for this record, because it came on in 1925. Probably made a little bit later than that, so there you go. Thanks for watching. We'll do it again soon.